Hello, dear friends. Did you know that back in 1845, that means 177 years ago, a Ukrainian poet described what would happen to Ukraine these days? Back in 1845, our Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko wrote two poems where he predicted, almost we could say prophetically, wrote about what would happen to Ukraine, which is happening right in front of our eyes. Basically, he says that Ukraine's volia, which means will and freedom, it's a universal Ukrainian word, means both will and freedom, that volia is buried in a grave, in a church, in a little village. And so let me explain to you what it means, and later I will share with you one short poem where it very clearly is described. So there is a village in Cherkasy region. The village is called Subotiv. Subota means Saturday, but it doesn't matter. The name of the village is Subotiv. In that village back in 17th century belonged to the Cossack centurion Mikhailo Khmelnytsky, and then to his son Bohdan. If you are familiar with Ukrainian history, you know who Bohdan Khmelnytsky is. He was a Ukrainian leader back in 17th century who signed a treaty with Moscow. Looking back to the past, we can obviously see that it was a huge geopolitical mistake that cost us Ukrainians centuries of great suffering and struggle and humiliation under Moscow's rule. Millions of killed people. Only one event that happened in 1932-1933, known as Holodomor, the artificial famine, where Joseph Stalin killed up to 10 million Ukrainians, and so many other people, like hundreds of thousands, are suffering, being killed right now in the year 2022. So all of this can be traced back to the time when a treaty was signed with Russia to help us struggle against Polish people, today our best friends. So in that village in Subotiv there is an old church which was built at the expense of this great leader, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and he was buried inside that church. Our great poet, Taras Shevchenko, lived in the 19th century, 2 centuries after Bogdan Khmelnytsky. He looked back at what Bogdan Khmelnytsky did, and he understood the whole tragedy of what had happened. In the long poem titled The Great Vault, Shevchenko prophesied that as Russians fight about Ukraine, they would themselves dig that grave where Khmelnytsky was buried. But by that grave, he means where Ukraine's volia, will and freedom, was buried. That's kind of figuratively he says that that's where our volia was buried. So that Russians themselves will dig that grave. In their desire to completely destroy Ukraine, they will dig that grave. But then Ukraine's will and freedom, Ukraine's volia, will rise like a resurrection of the dead. Anyway, that's a very long poem, and we're not going to look at it. I'm going to share with you another poem written in the same year, and the name of it is Subotiv. Yes, the name of the village where the church is, where Bogdan Khmelnytsky was buried, and where Shevchenko says our volia, our will and freedom, was buried as well. And Shevchenko himself marked his poem Subotiv as a sequel to the first poem, the long poem, The Great Vault. So let's look at the lines here. Let's look at the first lines. I will read the English translation by Andrew Sishen and Kirk Connell. So we'll not read the whole poem now in English, we'll just read a few lines, and then I will read you the whole poem in Ukrainian with the English translation on the screen. So the first line: in the village of Subotiv, upon a lofty hill, there stands the coffin of Ukraine, a crypt both wide and still. It is the church of great Bohdan, where once he used to pray, that Muscovite and Cossack might share good and ill always. He believed that we can live peacefully with Moscow, that's what he means here. May peace be to your soul, Bohdan, their gain has been our loss. The Muscovites have snatched away all that they came across. Yeah, so he describes that that's not what he expected, that's not what Bohdan expected. Something else happened. Moscow just wants to destroy us since that times. Let's look at the last 8 lines, which are the greatest, I think. Let's look at them and analyze them a little bit. So, yet do not laugh, ye foreign folk, that church beneath the skies may crumble down, but from its vaults a new Ukraine will rise. Wow, so you see, he says, yes, one day the church will crumble down, and from its vaults a new Ukraine will rise from the grave. To end the night of slavery, injustice will be gone. Our serf-born sons' glad orisons will greet sweet freedom's dawn. I should admit that I just learned the word orison this time, just when I was studying this translation. I didn't know it before. It basically means prayers. So new Ukraine will end the night of slavery, injustice will be gone, and our serf-born sons' glad prayers will greet sweet freedom's dawn, he says. What Shevchenko saw is he saw the serf-born sons, he saw the slaves, the people who are mentally enslaved in bondage, whose thinking, whose mentality is not, makes it impossible for them to be free. You know, for centuries Ukraine was full of freedom-loving people. But unfortunately, many people were in bondage, both spiritually and physically and mentally. Yes, we should say we are serf-born sons, but unfortunately our ancestors were slaves, but our ancestors were not only slaves, they were the famous Cossacks, freedom lovers, freedom fighters who fought for centuries. And their chief was Bogdan Khmelnytsky. It's just that he made the wrong geopolitical decision at that time. We always have valued our freedom. We value it still. God himself created humans to be free. The Bible says that God sent Jesus Christ to set slaves free. First of all, spiritual freedom, but also in other meanings. It's not God's will in creating humans that humans should be slave to someone. And what we saw just recently after Soviet Union collapse is still that slavery mentality in our people's minds. But what we see now is basically what Shevchenko is predicting. When Russia starts to destroy Ukraine completely, then this dead nation will rise alive, and the darkness of slavery will finish, and the light of truth will shine. The children of slaves will pray in their freedom. Isn't it wonderful? Shevchenko saw our future as free people who will live in truth and pray to God. I find it just exciting. Let's read now this poem in Ukrainian, or listen to this poem in Ukrainian original, and you will see both the original and the translation on the screen. So if you want, you can listen to it and enjoy how it sounds in the beautiful Ukrainian language. Стоїть в селі Суботові, на горі високій, домовина України, широка, глибока. Ото церков Богданова, там-то він молився, щоб москаль добром і лихом з козаком ділився. Мир душі твоїй, Богдане, не так воно стало. Москалики, що заздріли, то все очухрали. Могили вже розривають та грошей шукають. Льохи твої розкопують та тебе жилають. Ще й за труди не находять. Отак-то, Богдане, занапастив єси в Богу, сироту Україну. За те ж тобі така й дяка, церков домовину, нема кому полагодить. На тій Україні, на тій самій, що з тобою ляха задавила, байстрюки Єкатерини з сараною сіли. Отаке та Зіновію, Олексіїв друже, ти все отдав приятелям, а їм і байдуже. Кажуть, бачиш, що все то те таки й було наше, що вони тільки наймали татарам на пашу та полякам. Може й справді, нехай і так буде. Так сміються ж з України сторонні люди. Не смійтеся, чужі люди, церков домовина розвалиться, і з-під неї встане Україна. І розвіє тьму неволі, світ правди засвітить, і помоляться на волі невольничі діти.